okay, just go get me new patients. And I think that's the most inefficient thing you can do, because the reality is that you've got a database of people who have already sort of done business with you. Maybe that was 4 years ago. But what I find is that if you put some of those messages that we just developed in front of those patients for on average about 5 months straight, even if they haven't been to your practice for, 60 months, we can get, on average, if we run what I call a strategic reactivation program, where we take a database and we say, everybody 13 to 60 months that hasn't been in your practice. Even up to those 60 months, what we're finding is that really low unsubscribe rates, so they find the communication relevant, and then after 4 to 6 months, depending on, again, what that database looks like, we can get 20-something% of those people to walk in the door.
Hello and welcome to the Chris Roll Podcast on iCode Media. Today I had a great conversation with Eugene Schatzman. It was a lot of fun to pick his brain about how he sees our profession and where he sees opportunities for us to improve our patient acquisition and our patient reactivation within our practices, the way we communicate with our patients, the way we value our patients. Please enjoy the conversation. It was a ton of fun. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, share it with your friends, and support those who support us. The most common questions I get include, what ophthalmological codes or evaluation and management codes should I use? What ICD-10 codes do I need to bill with this CPT code? What CPT codes can be billed together and what can't? And my favorite, how do I manage a patient who has diabetes who comes in for a quote-unquote routine eye exam? These questions really highlight the confusion and uncertainty that serves as a daunting hurdle for providers, makes it more challenging for them to care for their patients and provide those patients with the best opportunity for a lifetime of ocular health and clear vision. That's why we built iCode Education, for this specific purpose. Our mission is to provide optometrists with resources to help you understand disease states, revenue cycles, and billing and coding so that you can put that on autopilot and truly care for your patients. Check out iCodeEducation.com. That's EYECODE education.com. We've developed a premier billing and coding bundle that includes all of our billing and coding resources in one place. We also have a 10% discount code just for listeners of this podcast. Enter the coupon code EYECODEMEDIA22 at checkout. We'd love to work with you. Check out iCodeEducation.com. Hello, dedicated optometrists. Are you looking for a way to support your patient's vision and overall eye health? Let me introduce you to Vision Edge Pro, a visual performance supplement that stands out in our profession. Vision Edge Pro contains a balanced blend of mesozeaxanthine, lutein, and zeaxanthine in a 10-10-2 ratio. This combination has been scientifically shown to increase macular pigment density, which enhances visual performance, including contrast sensitivity and vision in glare situations. Additionally, Vision Edge Pro provides 300 milligrams of DHA and EPA, fulfilling the daily requirements for omega-3s as recognized by the leading health organizations. This ensures your patients receive the essential nutrients their eyes need for optimal health. Whether it's for everyday screen use, night driving, or enjoying the outdoors, Vision Edge Pro supports your patients in seeing their best. Recommend Vision Edge Pro for your patients today and help them achieve clearer, healthier vision. Contact your local MacuHealth representative for more details. Vision Edge Pro, because your patients deserve the best in eye health. Go to MacuHealth.com and use the coupon code PODCAST2024 at checkout for special discounts. So thanks, Eugene, for coming on today. And it's a great opportunity for me to kind of pick your brain about what you see within the profession and how you look at different metrics in the profession. When I was on your podcast, we talked a lot about KPIs related to medical management, and we talked a little bit about how that plays into a role of a kind of a greater practice management and the KPIs that we look at. But let's take a step back and think about when you work with practices, when your company works with practices, what types of things do you do and what do you see kind of common behaviors that occur within, well, maybe we talk about independent practices and the types of things that you see.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, Chris, and thanks for having me on the show. One of my biggest things that I always like to look at, and I think it's probably one of the most overlooked metrics in a typical practice, is what I call allowable acquisition cost. And for context for your audience, I've been a huge fan of consumer behavior, and I tried to figure out how to study consumer behavior in college because that wasn't really a thing that happened. But after I couldn't figure that out, I sort of developed my own little mini studies by split testing pretty much everything I possibly could when trying to run my own small businesses. And what I realized was that by simply testing things and having a mindset where you treat everything a little bit like a science experiment, you can optimize, right? Early on, for example, when I was trying to, I was looking for some roommates in a real estate project that I was involved in, and I was trying to convince people that they should move miles and miles away from campus when I was in college. And one of the ways to convince them of that was to have a really effective conversation about what their needs are, what I want, and what they potentially want. And what I did is I just recorded those conversations, and I listened to myself, and I said, oh, well, that was an effective way to have that conversation. That wasn't an effective way, and what am I going to try a little bit differently? And so it was kind of like this birth of like, okay, I'm going to try to experiment with ways to potentially acquire customers, but I'm going to only focus on one variable, right? So fast forward to eye care practices, and my organization works with thousands of eye care practices across the country, and one of the things that we constantly look at is, well, what experiments can we run to optimize? But when I think about optimization, well, what are we really trying to optimize for? And one of the core components is optimize for what is the cheapest way to acquire the right type of patient for a practice. But you got to think about that, what's the right type of patient for a practice, and how much experimentation is there that a practice can allow. And that's where the metric of allowable acquisition cost comes in. That's kind of my, I think a little bit of a backstory, but I think it also creates a little bit of a backdrop for us to talk about when we think about what metrics really matter and what marketplace trends are there today that can help drive allowable acquisition cost up and down inside the practice, but then also what are the things that actually, then you've got actual acquisition cost for a patient, what are the kinds of things you can do to lower that, because I think that's what everybody wants.
So then the first thing is the first step in this calculation is really figuring out what's the type of patient that you want to see in your practice. And because if you calculate your allowable acquisition costs for your current patient population, and then you apply that to a new population where those patients are different in some way, it no longer works, right? So can you walk me through that?
Yeah, and I think, I'll give you two examples I just had very recently with a client. And this client, we were sitting and he was saying, I've got a couple locations that are a little bit underperforming, and I really need to figure out how to drive some heads in the door. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about what's going on at those locations. And he said, well, yeah, I've got an OD at each one of them. And I said, okay, this is an important question. Is your OD on salary, or is your OD on percent of production? And that OD happened to be on salary. I said, so just to clarify, if you see 10 patients that day, or if you see 3 patients that day, or if you see 20 patients that day, that OD gets paid the same. Yes. Okay, great. So now we know that that's a fixed cost, that's not a variable cost. Then we think about, okay, well, what are other variable costs associated with a patient? Okay, well, in general eye care, there's going to be cost of goods, right? So you've got lenses, frames, whatever. So in that particular case, I think we decided it was fair to say about 30%, maybe 32%, something like that. Okay, fine. So then I said, okay, well, what's your average patient, what's your revenue per patient, right? Or what you would say might be revenue per refraction, but
sure.
That practice doesn't do a whole lot of specialty services, not a lot of medical. And they said, well, I think it's about $400. Okay, so now let's do the math. So what's 2/3 of $400? Right, it's $233. I think, right?
Sort of. Close.
No, 300. No.
2/3? 66%. I know, it's early in the morning.
Times 400.
It's earlier for me.
$264. Yes, sorry, okay. I was off by $33. So, so what's 2/3 of what is your variable And that's what drops down to the bottom line, right? If
Right.
that OD is sitting there and they're, at whatever, 60% capacity, that $264 is what drops down to the bottom line every single time that you see an additional patient at that location, right? And so then we say, well,
Yep.
that's your, that's your contribution margin, or however you want to potentially frame it. But of that $264, what do you want to allow to use for acquisition cost? And that formula changes a little bit, right? If you have, 90% utilization and, like new patients are waiting for 2 weeks to get in and that kind of thing, and patients can't get on the schedule and whatever, there's a very different number, there's a very different percentage of that 264 that you might be willing to give up. But if your OD is sitting there kind of trying to figure out what to do with their time, and your staff is sitting there trying to figure out what to do with their time, then you might be willing to give up a much bigger percentage of that to bring in new patients, because really any part of that $264 that can drop down to the bottom line is more money than you had before, assuming all those factors. That make sense?
Yep.
So that's where you would then guide we would have a conversation. In that particular case, the client decided that, actually like $100 per patient for allowable acquisition cost, that's going to spend $400 on average, is totally reasonable, as long as you can get enough of them, right? Don't give me one, because I don't know if one is going to be, if one's going to walk out without buying anything, but get me a bunch, and then we'll play the numbers game and we'll do what we do, and then we'll be able to, we'll spend up to $100. Now, having that upper limit of up to $100 opens up a whole world of experimentation, right? I can do all kinds of different things to try to acquire that patient using some of the latest technology. I can use some techniques in Google, some useful tools that Google can provide that otherwise wouldn't be available. And so I can play with those experiments. Where did we end up? Well, we actually ended up with $26 for patient acquisition cost, but it gave me room to run some pretty high value experiments.
Yeah. So then in those experiments, you're basically just playing with keywords on what's going to attract new patients. How much do you dig into the existing patient population in terms of like, okay, well, describe to me the ideal patient that you're looking for, and then you're using those types of keywords in Google AdWords? Is that sort of the way the game works?
I think that's one of the tools, right? Like there's lots and lots of ways to generate demand. In fact, I think we have, I'm going to say something like 40 different predictable levers that can be used to drive patients in the door. And I mean, it's really, Chris, anything from building referral systems in your practice to driving, to leveraging, what most practices might call their past patient list, their inactive patient list. In some cases, you could use ads on platforms like Meta, and oftentimes Google does offer, in some of the recent developments, Google's got access inventory that it's turned into a program called PMax, Performance Max, and that access inventory could potentially be used to drive patients in the door if set up correctly.
You say access inventory. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so let's back up for a second. Google makes a ton of money from ads on search, right? We all have this experience. We go on Google, we type anything in there, and if you type a product, it's going to put a bunch of products at the top of the list, and and it'll say sponsored in little gray letters next to some of those. If you type in a service, it'll probably pop up. The first couple listings where you're pretty used to it, it'll say, sponsored next to each of those, but those people paid to be there, right? That's Google. That's traditional Google Ads. That's the traditional Google search ads network that's been around for, ages, and over a decade and a half, maybe more, is how Google's been making money from that. So then Google also had this cool idea, and this is more than a decade ago as well, is to say, there's real estate on different places in the right, like there's a spot on CNN.com that we can sell, or that CNN.com will sell to us or lease to us, and if we put an ad there and someone clicks on that ad, we'll share the revenue between Google and CNN.com, right? That's also not really new. That was called the AdSense network, But if you're an advertiser, what you had to do is you would have to submit your creative in different sizes, and then you would, all the different banner sizes that Google could potentially put anywhere, and then you would say, okay, I want to sign up for AdSense, and I want to place the AdSense, and I'll pay per impressions, or I'll pay per clicks off of that, and then basically that's how you get the ads that sometimes follow you around. What's interesting though is that inventory, Google has realized that inventory of both AdSense and other things like YouTube, right? Google owns YouTube, so you've got video inventory, and then you've got mixed media inventory, where you've got somebody has said to Google, we got a lot of traffic, but we don't know what to do with it. So put anything you want here. You can put a GIF, you could put a video, you could put a whatever. And so what Google's done is it said, okay, and this is wise because Google traditionally, you would say, it was exactly what you said, which is that you would pick keywords, right? I would say eye doctor near me. I want an ad to show up when something happens, when somebody types eye doctor near me into Google. Interesting, right? But that's a very clear, Eugene's understanding of how my consumers make decisions. They type eye doctor near me into Google, and I want an ad to show up. By the way, that's not the most cost-efficient way to optimize for that particular behavior.
Right.
But but that's traditional search. Here, with this Access Inventory game, Performance Max, what you can say is, I want a different type of consumer. I want Chris. I want a guy, who has a certain income range. I want him. I want to make sure that he is educated. I want to make sure he has an advanced degree. I want to make sure that, and I want to make sure that he's in a very specific geography. And then you, Google, decide, I'll upload everything I have about me. I'll upload my videos, I'll upload my, my pictures, I'll upload my testimonials, I'll upload everything I possibly can. I'll give you access to all of my digital assets. And Google, I want your AI engine to make a decision for me of how you're going to attract the Chris's of the world for me using whatever access you have somewhere. So Google, of course, knows when we browse the search engine, it knows a whole bunch of stuff about us. In fact, Google is the company that collects more data points about us than anybody else. And if you're using the G Suite, it knows. And if you're using Google Pay and all that type of stuff, it keeps track of your transactions. Right? This is not like conspiracy. It publicly says we use that information to help us make better advertising, so that we can provide you with a better advertising experience, so that the advertisers can really be relevant to what you're doing. And in some cases, that's pretty good for consumers. But Google uses all that information, then it says, okay, based off of everything I know about Chris, I know Chris might be, watching this YouTube video. I'm going to shove this ad into Chris's experience. Or Chris might be playing this game, and I might shove that ad into Chris's experience. Or Chris might be using this app, or Chris might be on this website that people like Chris go to all the time. But also, I know enough about Chris that I'm just going to put that ad up right in front of Chris. And that's what I mean by access inventory. What Google figured out is that it could expand its advertising pool by using AI to make a decision about, how do I best pair the content that the advertiser provides with the type of person that the advertiser is looking to attract. But those experiments currently, because they're a little bit, I'd call them beta-ish, because they're using a lot of Google's AI, those experiments are currently a little bit unreliable. So going back to my earlier point, that's why you kind of need to have a higher allowable acquisition cost to run enough experiments to say, all right, because there's still 30 or 40 different levers you have to pull inside of that setup machine to get Google good at understanding who Chris is and what content and what the content means, and how we're going to optimize that campaign. There's still a lot of human control that's still an optimization that needs to happen, and monitoring. So at that point, the question becomes, okay, what are you willing to risk? And of course, it's your marketing company's job to make sure that that risk is minimized.
Right. Yeah, so then you get to play within that. So it plays with, like you said, a beta version of what its AI wants to do. But your expertise comes down to knowing, well, just like when I talk to ChatGPT will give, if I say, ChatGPT, tell me about this code, it'll give me back stuff. But, half the time there's incorrect information it's spitting back out. but I get to guide it to where it's now giving it. Then by the time I'm done having that conversation with it, it's like now this is better. It's a better way to answer this than I could have had, but it could have never come up with that idea because it would have given a whole bunch of wrong information. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the premise is that it's almost like prompt engineering for AI, because you're absolutely right, is that you have to guide the AI to help and you really have to look at the feedback that the AI is giving you in the very beginning to say, okay, well, I'm going to revise my prompt, so to speak. And so there's lots of different buttons and levers and settings you can set to kind of adapt that prompt, and then a whole bunch more information you can feed in order to help the AI make some decisions. But it's a very powerful ad engine that Google is building, and I think it was wise for Google to build it to try to compete with what was happening. Is a lot of people were saying, if I know my keywords, I'm going to go to Google. But if I know who I'm trying to attract, I'm going to go to Facebook, because Facebook's whole advertising model was always, we're going to interrupt people with ads, but we're going to interrupt people who are relevant to you. So, the meta ads, when you place the meta ads, the thing that you do is you always say, here's all the characteristics of the person I want to put my ad in front of. And with the privacy laws and, Apple kind of cutting Meta off a little bit, it became a little bit harder to do pinpoint targeting. But I could have said a few years ago, I could have easily said, I want to know exactly how many women in this particular radius are between this particular age, have this many kids, have this type of income, and also recently moved to the area. Right? Like, I could have done that, and then I could have run an ad to those people if the audience was big enough. The reality is that that's audience-based interruption advertising, which is how traditional advertising generally tries to work. It was just a more precise way to do it. Google's newer AI engine allows you to do much more targeting, even though you're still looking for a little bit of intent, but much more targeting and push interruption rather than necessarily just intent-based marketing when the person is thinking about it.
And then when you think about the metrics of how you know this is successful, so when you say somebody comes on board with you all and you're going to start one of these strategies and these campaigns, you still look at revenue per patient. Now you understand your acquisition cost, and is it a month? Are you reflecting in a quarter? Like where do you say, like, give me this so much time and we're going to show you a benefit? CooperVision and the AOA have joined forces in a groundbreaking initiative to transform how optometrists treat children with myopia. The Myopia Collective aims to unite our profession and its allies to challenge the status quo and elevate the standard of care for children with myopia. Everyone is invited to become a member of the collective. By joining, you pledge to act in slowing childhood myopia progression. Membership includes regular updates and information about the collective's efforts, access to educational opportunities and resources, and insights from the ambassador optometrists who advocate for community policy and changes supporting the collective's mission. Click the link in the show notes to join the collective today. One of the challenging things with patients is when they invest in a really high quality pair of glasses and customized lenses, it can be challenging to keep those lenses clean, keep them scratch-free, smudge-free. And so we now have the ability with Crizal Sapphire HR lenses to offer our patients the best-in-class anti-reflective coating in a way that is really high resistance so that they're not having to care for their lenses as much as when those lenses are caring for them. So remember that you can provide patients that best in quality, best in class transparency, clarity, durability, and UV protection in a single Crizal coating. If you want to learn more about Crizal Sapphire HR, contact your Essilor account executive or visit essilorpro.com/Crizal.
Yeah, and I think I'll maybe back up and say that a typical engagement with us requires us to get really, really deep and understand the business first. Mm-hmm. So part of the whole premise of marketing can be done by anybody, for anybody in a cookie cutter way. I haven't seen that to be true. So we've adapted a very different approach, which is saying, hey, in order for us to actually market a business, what we have to do, or to actually grow a business, we have to truly understand that business. That's one of the reasons why we specialize in the eye care industry and eye care industry only, because it allows us to really know what's going on inside of the practice. And so if I were to talk to you about your practice, I will ask you relevant questions that help me understand how it is that your practice flow works, what kind of pre-testing equipment you have, what your patient experience tends to work towards. Are you more of a high end or are you more of a high volume? Do you have more medical patients? Are you seeing a particular? And it allows me to ask some specific questions about the way that you treat certain specialties. And so when we get to know all of those pieces of the practice, we identify what I call leverage points. Right? Leverage points are what you have that the guy down the street doesn't have. And so if we understand the leverage points, and then we can say, okay, well, what kind of messaging can we potentially develop around those leverage points? What's the brand story? What's the visual brand look like that ultimately communicates those leverage points in the best possible way? And then the next question becomes, well, who do we have to put that in front of? Now, a lot of people would say, well, okay, just go get me new patients. And I think that's the most inefficient thing you can do, because the reality is that you've got a database of people who have already sort of done business with you. Maybe that was 4 years ago. But what I find is that if you put some of those messages that we just developed in front of those patients for on average about 5 months straight, even if they haven't been to your practice for 60 months, we can get, on average, if we run what I call a strategic reactivation program, where we take a database and we say, everybody 13 to 60 months that hasn't been in your practice. Even up to those 60 months, what we're finding is that really low unsubscribe rates, so they find the communication relevant, and then after 4 to 6 months, depending on again what that database looks like, we can get 20-something% of those people to walk in the door. So think about how big that database is or to take action towards walking into the door. So what that means is that you have when you think about leveraged assets, you have an asset in your past patient list, and most practices have an asset in their past patient list. And what they've done with that asset, for the most part, if you look at what most softwares do, what they've done with that asset is they've hit them with a couple like, hey Chris, it's time for your exam. Please click here to schedule. Right. Hey Chris, you're 2 years over. It looks like it's been at least a year since your last exam. Please click here to schedule. Right, and that's the reason those softwares, and I completely understand why, but the reason those software companies do not send a message every single month, because you would unsubscribe. Because if you got a text message from your eye doctor, who you haven't seen for 2.5 years, if you got a message from them that said, hey Chris, you haven't been in, please schedule your appointment. Hey Chris, you haven't been in, please schedule your appointment. Yes, there would be some people who take action, but there would be more people who would be annoyed and say, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and unsubscribe from this. What we find is that if I take those leverage points that I mentioned initially, and if I turn them into a compelling campaign, fall fashions for your face, or maybe we talk about the impact of glaucoma on an aging population, or if we talk about you can be somewhat promotional, but you can talk about some really unique things that are going on in your optical, or something or a patient testimonial with a subspecialty that the practice is well indexed in. All of a sudden, those pieces of content become real content, and you're allowed to send real content to people every month, and some percentage of people will read them, and some percentage of people will re-engage with your practice. And so to me, that's the most when you talk about starting, that's one of the most impactful ways of generating demand for a practice. It's not necessarily what we would call, new patient that's never heard of you down the street. It's communicating your value, your leverage points properly and effectively to the marketplace that already sort of kind of knows you, but maybe hasn't seen you for a few years.
Yeah, I mean, my experience now is, for my patients, so I have an associate who's still growing her practice, but when I think about my patients, it's like when I see a new patient, the thoughts that go through my mind is like, well, I don't even know if they're going to want the care that I'm providing. Like they might think they want to come to me because their brother or their sister, whatever, and like they get in on the schedule. But to your point, it's like, there's almost like this bigger risk with a new patient because they might not like the way that you do business, right? They actually might want they like in our practice, we would consider our practice a pretty like high touch practice, high tech practice. We want to kind of develop relationships long term with patients. And you and I talked about that on your podcast last time. And everybody kind of says that, and I think maybe everybody believes the same thing I believe, but I find that when I see a new patient, there's often this risk that they've found me. They think they want an eye exam, right? Mm-hmm. But they want a different eye exam than what I want to provide. So they don't want me to talk to them about their family history. They don't want me to talk to them about their ocular surface disease. They don't want me to they just wanted a pair of glasses. And then that leads to potential friction points where in the rest of the office is like, well, I just want what my insurance pays for, or where most of the time we just never get that within our existing patient population because they already know what to expect. Yeah. And so the fact that patients, you're saying go out to 5 years, the fact that patients are out there, I don't even think about it. When we reactivate, our campaigns that as far as reactivation goes don't go back that far. And so I like that idea because a lot of times we'll see, and even now with COVID, you're like, I'll see somebody, it's like, wow, I haven't seen you in 4 years. I can't believe it's been 4 years, that doesn't happen that often, but it happens, and they already know what they're expecting, and we know what we're expecting. Like we had a patient that, just as an example, we had a patient that a couple weeks ago scheduled online, filled out the information, and then was mad because by the time she put her insurance information, and we don't take her insurance. So she writes this bad Google review, and we followed up with her. We try to say this, and we so we do all these things on the front end to try to. It's like you are not even you didn't have any expectations. She said, "Well, maybe you don't take my insurance." The rant was, "Maybe you don't take my insurance because it doesn't pay very well, but I would buy a very nice pair of glasses." And it's like, I mean, it just totally misses the point of what we're trying to do for our patients, But that's the risk, right? That's a risk of a new patient, where existing patients, you rarely, in my experience, have that risk, right? Because they already know what to expect, and they already like you, and they've gotten past the barrier of like, well, this is the way we want to do business, and this is the type of patients we want to see. So,
right. And you might realize, and there's kind of two angles to that. So the first one is go back to your patient who hasn't been in for 4 or 5 years. The reality is that maybe they went somewhere. Maybe they went to Costco. Maybe they went to whatever a different location. And when you're communicating your value back to them, they get a chance to make a choice. They say, you know what? Yeah, that place was a little bit more expensive, but I actually felt like I got a better eye exam. I liked the doctor a lot more. I didn't feel like I was rushed through, and actually these glasses that I got at the last place don't really work that well. So honestly, yeah, I get reminded that that's a value that I could potentially self-select into and say, I'm already primed. I will pay more, and I will be a patient who's more appreciative of experience because I could have gone because I went somewhere else and I didn't really like it. Right? That's one population. The other population. Let's talk about these new patients that you mentioned, because this happens to everybody. Right? Is that new patients come in, and those new patients have an expectation of what an eye exam is. And oftentimes, a lot of providers that we work with, they tend to wow that patient. They tend to have the experience of, wow, that was the most thorough eye exam I've ever had, and that was the most, and that was really something different than I was expecting, right? Yep. And that wow is definitely, oftentimes that happens in the lane, or it happens, somewhere during the conversation with the doctor, where they say, oh, okay, yeah, that's different than what I was expecting. But to me, that's a good thing in some cases, because that means that you're outperforming the industry. But the fact that the patient wasn't aware of that wow before they walked in the door is a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Because, let's think about this as a possibility, but what if you could pre-program the patient to really be bought into what it is that you're doing ahead of time? And, just imagine a crazy world where instead of just a confirmation text that says, hey, Eugene, your appointment is at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Please, make sure that you filled out this online paperwork, and here's a link. What if instead of that, you sent a picture? It was an MMS, And in that picture, it looked like it was a video with a play button, and it says, "Hey, Eugene, you're seeing Dr. Wolf tomorrow, and Dr. Wolf made a special video to let you know what to expect." Okay, I watch that video and click on that, and then in that video, you tell your story. We treat our patients different. I'm so honored that you chose our practice to have your exam in. I just want to tell you a few things that make us a little bit different that patients tell us about all the time. And I want to make sure that you have a really great experience. And in order to do that, I'm gonna help you understand how our practice works and why we've chosen to do it this way so that we can better serve you, right? And listen, if I watch that video and I understand that there's a $39 imaging fee that I'm refusing to pay because I will only pay for my insurance. And if I'm not convinced by that video, because I heard the doctor tell me directly that this is really good for your eyes, unfortunately most insurance doesn't cover it, but we find that looking at this every single year gives us insight into not just your eye health, but your overall health and all this great stuff. If I'm not bought into that, I might cancel my appointment.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. But if I'm expecting that, this is an opportunity to explain your leverage points, explain the difference makers, explain them early and explain them often. And then, maybe there's a world in which you encourage people after the exam, you send them another thank you video. Hey, it was really great seeing you in the office. Because you're a new patient, I just wanted to make sure that you have every opportunity to provide us with your feedback. And instead of just asking for a review, you say, and by the way, if there's anybody in your household or anybody that that might benefit from the same level of experience that you got, we'd be very grateful and we'd be very honored to serve them as a patient as well. Please just forward this video to them, and we'll make sure to treat them like a VIP.
It's such an opportunity to amplify the care beyond our walls, and I think a lot of us obviously don't think about that regularly. Obviously when we have online access to lots of things, and we might think about that in certain instances, and we're bombarded with these types of things regularly. Google knows where I like to shop. They know where I like to shop online. And so I get those ads all the time. And so I think it's really great to be able to personalize that more within the patient populations that we serve, as well as extending that beyond our existing patient populations. In your mind, kind of final question that I have, so I can be respectful of your time, who is our competitors? Like if you're thinking about like an independent practice, who's the competitors of that independent practice that they need to be thinking about, and what are those competitors doing differently than what you may have described, or how do they view those patients differently than maybe what we view those patients as?
Yeah, I'll give you two answers to this, because I think when I look at any sort of product or service offering as a strategist, one of the questions you always look at is what are the substitute products. And one of the substitute products, unfortunately, is doing nothing. Right? My prescription doesn't feel like it's changed. I'm just going to skip it this year. And what we find, and we talked a little bit about this on my show, is that the average patient, we all think that we're really good at recall and that kind of stuff, but the average patient doesn't really come back across the industry. They don't really come back for 22 months, right? And if that's
do you think
the case,
sorry, Eugene, but do you think that some of us don't even want to see them back until they feel like their prescription's changing?
Is that? I mean, what do you think, Chris? I mean, would you want to see the patient back a year later, even if their prescription hasn't changed?
I would, but I wonder if I'm the norm, because I wonder, like, if the value that I see that the patient brings to the practice, right? If I'm willing to accept their managed vision care plan that doesn't pay me anything, and then they've got a good pair of glasses, they've got a good prescription, and they come back next year and it's still good, and they don't really want a new pair of glasses, and we have and like we can talk to them about new stuff, but they just don't buy it. Like, do I really want to see that patient? I'm just asking, what's your experience been? I
mean, there's also doctors who try to convince patients to just, pop out their old lenses and, just get new lenses for your existing frames to save you a couple bucks. Here's the thing. I believe that your job as an OD and our audience's job as ODs is not to be the patient's financial advisor. Your job is to take care of their eye health in the most preeminent way you know how. You need to be the most trusted advisor you possibly can on their eye health. And you need to see them as often as you want to see them in order to be able to support that promise. Now, if there's nothing else in your practice that you really screen for, if you have no diagnostics, if you have no dry eye stuff, if you have nothing that can help the patient in any way, shape, or form, other than, hey, it's just a refraction, I don't know, like maybe you're not really, I don't even know if you're really running a business at that point that truly serves the population that you're trying to serve. Or that completely serves the population you're trying to serve. My belief is that when the patient's in your chair, it is your preeminent responsibility to try to provide as much care as you possibly can for that patient and charge appropriately for it. You're not their financial advisor. You are there for their eye health, and quite frankly, they use their eyes enough that they should invest in their eye health. And I'll say that both as a marketing as a strategist, but I'll also say that as somebody who's has observed enough practices and has talked to enough ODs to hear both sides of the equation, that I'm fully bought into the fact that what we do is so important and so valuable to patients that you really can't. It's really not the right thing to do to not see that patient back and to not serve that patient in the fullest way you possibly can.
Well, thanks for saying that, Eugene, as a non-OD. I think that's really great to hear because, sometimes you just if you're, you get stuck in a rut, right? And as a clinician, you can get stuck in a rut and think like, am I really doing good? Am I really doing good? I'm just telling you like what the psychology is, like the behavior economics of what can happen in a practice is that it's refreshing to hear other people say, this is really valuable. And if we don't have that belief, right, as a profession, like I don't care if you buy, I want you to buy glasses. I want you to buy new glasses if but like I'm committed to you. My responsibility is to do what's in your best interest. And you have consulted me to run down all these traps. It's not about like, well, I don't know if you can afford to come back in a month or if you're going to have the co-pays or what. Like, it's not about that. It's like, let's remove all those barriers so we don't have to wonder about that. And so I think it's refreshing for us to hear from somebody who isn't an optometrist the words that you just spoke. So thanks for that. Sorry I departed from the second point that you were going to make.
Well, yeah, and I think the second point kind of brings us back to where we started the conversation, which is that if you think about what corporate does well oftentimes. You think about maybe not necessarily all private equity, but some private equity, what they do really well, and what some practices that are owned by corporate are doing really well, is that they're looking at their data and they're making decisions with their data. They're making business decisions with data. And that leads right back to experimentation, because if you're not looking at key points of data in your practice, and oftentimes when I think about patient acquisition or demand generation or just whatever it is that drives patients in a chair to keep the books full, all of that is a data-driven exercise, all of it. It's just numbers and stacking, and then you figure out which of the 40 levers that you could use to drive patients in the door you should pull, and each one of them has a different tail on it, right? SEO might have a 90-day tail, Google Ads might have a 72-hour tail, demand and strategic reactivation may have a 2-week tail on it. But all of those things, figuring out what works and then experimenting to say, okay, if I can make this a little bit better, if I can increase the conversion rate by 4%, if I can drive, there's perfect example is that, and I watch this happen all the time on corporate websites too, is that you notice how sometimes the language inside the buttons changes, or the colors of the buttons change. We found, because we split test for our clients, we found that you can get 26% more patients, more conversions from the same amount of traffic by simply changing the call to action from something like, and I don't remember exactly the language, but from something like, schedule your appointment to book your appointment on desktop and schedule now on mobile. How did we find that out? Well, we ran a bunch of tests, and then we looked at data, and we did this across, I think, a dozen websites, so that we had some statistically significant data, and then the data showed us that those were the optimal calls to action for certain types of website designs. But that's the kind of stuff that if you're not doing that stuff, if you're not looking at data and then optimizing from that, then you're behind some of the corporate, that is a leverage point that the corporate and some private equity folks have on you that... and you may have other leverage points that you have in your practice that you have on them, right? But that's one that's relatively easy to bring in, because with the prevalence of AI, with the prevalence of enough companies that do what we do, you really have to think through. It almost becomes, just another point in your practice that you can optimize. And if you optimize, that particular area, then again, back to your question, you can kind of be in a league of your own if you're doing enough to fully serve your patients, and you're also looking at the data and optimizing it, both on the how you practice side, but then also on the patient acquisition side.
Awesome. Eugene Schatzman, thanks so much for coming on. Tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, so I think probably the easiest place, so I have the Power Hour podcast, which is something that I've really enjoyed doing for the last I guess this is the first year, but the podcast's been around for a while. But also National Strategic Group is the marketing company that I lead, and that you can find at nationalstrategic.com, or just a couple other things that I do at eugeneschatzman.com.
Awesome. Eugene, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Great to be here, Chris.
Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and our YouTube channel, both linked in the show notes. Now, here's something exciting. We're giving away a 1-year subscription to Comprehensive Optometry Simplified. All you have to do is leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, take a screenshot, and email it to me at questions@icodeeducation.com. We'll put that in the show notes as well. We'll be selecting a winner on December 15th. So don't miss your chance to get access to this valuable resource. Thanks again for listening. I can't wait to see your reviews.